Hello and welcome again. This is elttraining.com and I'm Joga Conga. And this month we've got the second in a 4-part series on classroom management, and we're going to look at giving instructions. So as I said, this is a 4-part series. The first part we looked at last month was teacher talk and language grading, and this time we're going to look at instructions. So why are good instructions important? This might seem fairly self-evident, but effectively it's an efficient way of running the classroom. It gives learners confidence in you, it keeps the lesson running smoothly, and it probably increases opportunities for student talking time because you're not there babbling on too much. You can get things going, so there's more of them doing something and less of you setting it up. So I think these are good reasons to give good instructions, and it's a really central part of good classroom management. So let's start with an example, or rather with an anti-example. Listen to my instructions and see why you think they're not very good. Okay, so if you'll listen up a bit, we've got this piece of paper. It's got a bit of map on it. There are a few roads and a variety of the kind of facilities you'd find in a town. Okay, right. So what do? You'll each have one and you need to work with a partner. I think it's probably best if you turn your chairs around, but you can do that in a minute if you like. Okay, so the thing to do is to imagine that you're at your house at the top left-hand corner and you want to go to the cinema, for example. So you need to ask your partner for the directions, like we were just practicing before. Turn right, keep going, that kind of thing. Right, take it in turns. Off you go. Now, I hope you'll agree with me that those instructions weren't very good. So let's see how we could improve them. There are a few golden rules, I think, of giving good instructions. I never like to put down rules, maybe guidelines, golden guidelines we could say. The first thing is that it's really worth planning your instructions, especially when you're a novice teacher. It is worth thinking about what you're going to say, how you're going to give the instructions, and practice them. Quite simply, that's worth doing. Not all the time, but sometimes it's worth doing. First thing then is get their attention. They have to be listening to you in order that they're going to understand your instructions. So get their attention first. Doesn't have to be anything major. Right, okay. Something of that nature will get their attention. Be decisive. If you feel that you know what you're trying to get across, and this is where planning and practicing will come in. If you know what you're going to say and you know where you're going, it will all be easier, I promise you. Part of the thing is confidence. So be decisive, know where you're going, know what you've got to do, and don't shilly-shally about it. Speak clearly. Project your voice. Make sure they can hear you. And associated with that is that you need to use short sentences and simple language. This is particularly true at lower levels, of course, but even at higher levels, the objective here is to give them instructions they'll understand, so you don't need to make it complicated. So, for example, saying something like this at a lower level is difficult. We've got an embedded question there, we've got a verb therefore in an unusual place at the end of the sentence. It's difficult. This is much easier and really has the same effect. So think about how you can keep things simple. That's worth thinking about. Speak to the whole class. Now this might seem very obvious, but if this is your classroom, those orange dots are your learners sitting around the tables, perhaps. If you're standing here, for example, and talking to this table, then your back will be turned to quite a few of your learners and they won't be able to hear you even if they wanted to, or you won't catch their eye, you won't ensure that they're understanding. Here might be a better place. Or possibly even here, but make sure they can all see you. Make sure they're all paying attention to you and make sure you haven't got your back to any of them. Use visual or written clues. So in the example that I gave you, the obvious thing to do would be to show them the map that you're talking about. Show them what you want them to do. And associated with that, use gesture, point, use body language. If you want them to work in pairs, show them who you want them to work with, using your hands, for example. Use facial expressions, possibly not that one, but make sure they understand from your body language and your facial expressions what it is that you want them to do. This will help. Demonstrate. This is the big one. If you take nothing else from this video, this is really key. It's much easier to understand what you've got to do if you just see somebody do it. So demonstrate. Do the first one with them. Do the first couple of examples with them. Use a stronger learner to do it with you. If it's a partner type of thing, use a stronger learner and do a demonstration with them. Even at higher levels, this is useful. At lower levels, it's crucial. So demonstration is really worth a lot of explanation. That's really key. Another important thing to think is to break things down. Smaller steps. Don't give too many instructions at the same time. So give one instruction and get them to do it. Then give the next instruction. Don't give 6 instructions at the same time because they'll forget number 1 and 2, of course. You would too. And in a foreign language, of course, it makes it difficult. So thinking about breaking things down. Check that they understand. This is really important. You need to make sure that they do know what you want them to do. But be careful. There are a few caveats to this, a few elephant traps that you could easily fall into. This question is not very helpful because they will say yes, even if they don't. This question can be helpful sometimes. At lower levels, it's probably more difficult for them to explain what they have to do than to actually do it. So be careful of this kind of question. This kind of question too, what are called instruction checking questions, can be useful, can have a place, but you have to be careful not to overdo them because they can end up sounding rather patronising. So I think within reason this kind of question can be useful, but you do have to be a bit careful with them. Let's think of another couple of things which are practically important. What if I start and it's clear that one group that I've set up don't understand what to do? In that case, the best thing to do is to go over to that particular group and help them and explain. And monitoring around while learners are doing an activity will help you to know if they understood or not. So that's really important. How about though, if I start and it's clear that half the class don't understand what to do? In that case, I would definitely call a halt to the thing. It's not worth going round and explaining 6 times to 6 different groups the same thing. It's better to stop, realise that a significant number of people are still struggling and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. It's fine to say, okay, hang on, stop a minute. Right, let's just give those instructions again. Let's make sure they understand what to do. And then we can start again and the lesson will continue smoothly. Here's another good question. When do you give the handout, before or after the instructions? This depends a little bit on what your task is. Now, as soon as you give a handout to anybody, they will read it. Their attention will be on it. That's for sure. That's human nature, I think. So if you're giving out, for example, a reading task, if you give it to them before you give the instructions, they will start to read it. Even if you ask them not to, they will. I would. It's just what you tend to, where your eyes tend to be drawn, I think, isn't it? But if you've got something like the map activity that we just looked at, then that kind of thing definitely would be worth giving beforehand, because it's really useful to be able to see it in order to understand what you've got to do with it. So there's not a right or wrong answer to this question, I think, but it's worth considering why you choose to give it before or not. That's worth thinking about. So we started off with a bad example. Let's look at a better example of the same thing. Okay, can you all look at me? Good. Now we're going to practice giving directions. Turn right, turn, learners left. Yes, good. So here's a map. Can you see this? Obviously I'm showing it to them. They've probably got the handout on their table at that time. It's a town. Here's my house, and I want to go to the cinema. It's here. I'm going to show them. So what do? I come out of my house and I turn right. And then at the crossroads, and I'm pointing at this at the time, I turn left. Good. And go straight on. The cinema, and I'm pointing at this at the same time, is on my left. Okay, Salma, let's have an example. How do I get to the coffee shop from my house? And let Salma explain. If she's struggling, you might get another learner to do a different one if you think they're not sure of this. Great. Now turn to face your partner. Gesture with this. Make sure they all know where they're supposed to be and who they're supposed to be working with, and get them looking at each other before you move on. Ask your partner, how can I get to the cinema, the garage? This question is a question which you will already have practiced, drilled perhaps. It's on the board so they can see it. Ask each other about 6 different places, and off they go. So hopefully that would be much clearer than what we did before. You can see that we're using gesture, we're using visual clues, we're breaking the instructions down, we're doing a demonstration, we're making it very clear to learners what they need to do. So I hope that's been a bit of help. Good luck with your instructions, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much. Bye bye.